On a busy corner in downtown Atlanta, the sun beat down on the sidewalk as cars rushed by and people hurried along. In the middle of it all, a black man in his 50s sat quietly on the pavement. His graying hair peeked out from under a worn beanie, and his layered clothing hung loose on his frame. Despite the noise and heat, he appeared calm, almost peaceful. Next to him stood a large piece of cardboard propped against a rusted milk crate. Painted on it was a burst of color, shapes and strokes that didn't follow any rules, but somehow told a story. He didn't ask for money. He didn't speak much at all. He just sat there each day, painting. Some days with a brush, some days with his fingers. The sidewalk was his studio. And the world, whether it liked it or not, was his audience. A group of people passed by without even looking. Others glanced and moved on. Then came two young adults, a white man and an Asian woman, both in their 20s. They stopped right in front of his painting. The man wore ripped jeans and spotless sneakers. The woman had a camera slung across her shoulder and a coffee in hand. They stared at the painting for a moment, then exchanged glances. "Seriously," the man said, shaking his head. "This looks like something a kid made with finger paint." The woman laughed. "I've seen better stuff on a bathroom wall." They snickered loudly, not caring if the artist heard. Darius, the man on the ground, didn't flinch. He just dipped his fingers into a jar of red paint and added a line across the canvas. He didn't look at them. He didn't say a word. He let the color speak for him. As the two laughed and started to walk away, they didn't notice the man standing behind them. He looked very different from everyone else on the street. Tall and sharp, with slicked-back silver hair and a dark-tailored suit, the older man wore polished shoes that reflected the sunlight. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but his body language said everything. He wasn't laughing. He took a few slow steps forward and stopped in front of the painting. His head tilted slightly, as if he were trying to read the emotions hiding beneath the colors. The two young adults turned and noticed him. Their smirks faded. Do you like it?" the young man asked, unsure now. The older man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He scribbled something down and tore out the page. Then he knelt beside the homeless artist and placed the note on the crate beside the painting. "Your work has power," he said softly, just loud enough to be heard. Then he stood up and walked away. The two young adults watched in silence. Darius finally looked up, glanced at the note, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his coat. He still didn't say a word. But the next day, when he painted, there was something new in his colors. A quiet spark. The next morning, Darius returned to his usual spot on the sidewalk. The air was cooler, and the sky was pale with soft clouds drifting overhead. He sat down slowly, laying out his brushes and paints with care. His hands were steady, though the skin on them was rough from years of life on the streets. People walked by without stopping. They were in a hurry, eyes fixed on their phones or talking into earbuds. Some glanced at him and kept moving. Others looked through him, as if he wasn't even there. But Darius was used to that. He didn't paint to be noticed. He painted because it helped him breathe. Today's canvas was another piece of cardboard he had found behind a store. He had cleaned it as best as he could, then set to work with a mix of blues and browns. His fingers moved slowly at first, then faster as the colors began to blend. Shapes formed, ones even he didn't plan. It was like the picture already existed in his mind, and he was just letting it out. A group of teenagers passed by, laughing and throwing comments at each other. One of them pointed at Darius and said, "Yo, is that art or a mess?" They all laughed and walked off. Darius kept painting. He didn't react. He had heard worse. Around midday, a soft voice broke the pattern of footsteps. "Excuse me," the voice said. Darius looked up. Standing in front of him was a little girl, maybe 8 years old. She wore a pink jacket and held her mother's hand. Her eyes were wide as she looked at the painting. "Is that a bird?" she asked, pointing to the shape near the corner. Darius looked at it. It wasn't meant to be a bird, but now that she said it, he could see it too. "Maybe it is," he said gently. The girl smiled. "I like it. It looks like it's flying over a dream." Her mother gave a polite nod and tugged her hand. "Come on, sweetie." The girl waved goodbye, and Darius gave a small wave back. After they walked away, he stared at the painting for a long moment. Then he picked up a thin brush and added soft lines around the shape, giving the bird clearer wings. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, and the shadows changed. Darius kept working. He didn't stop for food. He didn't speak. The world around him kept moving fast, but in his corner, time moved slowly and with purpose. Just as he was packing up, he noticed someone watching him from across the street. It was the same older man from the day before, the one in the suit with silver hair. He stood near a bench, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Darius's painting. He didn't say anything. He didn't move closer. But Darius saw him, and for the first time in a long while, Darius felt seen. Not as a homeless man, not as someone to mock, but as an artist. The morning after, Darius arrived earlier than usual. The streets were still quiet, and the city hadn't fully woken up yet. A light mist floated in the air, and the ground felt cool beneath him. He set down his supplies and unfolded a small cloth to wipe off his brushes. Today, his hands didn't shake as much. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was something else. He picked up one of his old paintings, the one with the dreamlike bird, and placed it carefully beside him. He looked at it for a long time before starting a new piece. The colors he chose today were softer, pale oranges, deep greens, and warm yellows. He didn't know exactly what he was painting yet. He rarely did, but it always came together, little by little. As the city began to wake up, more people walked by. Some looked curious, others confused. A few stopped to stare but said nothing. Darius could hear whispers now and then. "Isn't that the guy with the strange paintings?" "Yeah, he's always here. I think he sleeps near the bus stop." Still, Darius stayed focused. He mixed colors in a small plastic lid and added quiet details to his work. He didn't paint for approval. He painted because it made the day feel like it had meaning. Around mid-morning, the silver-haired man returned. He stood a few steps back, hands in the pockets of his long coat. His face was calm but serious. After watching for a few minutes, he stepped forward and crouched beside the artist. "May I look closer?" he asked. Darius nodded. The man studied the painting for a while. He didn't rush, and he didn't talk just to fill silence. Finally, he spoke. "Your work has movement. It feels alive." Darius didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't something he heard often. He gave a small nod and looked back at his painting. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a card. It was thick, with gold letters printed neatly across it. He handed it to Darius. "My name is William Hart. I collect art. Serious art. I've worked with galleries across the country. If you ever feel ready, contact me. No pressure." Darius took the card carefully and looked at it. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes changed. Something quiet, something hopeful. Before he could respond, William stood up. "I'll be nearby for a few days, just watching. Take your time." And with that, he walked away. For a while, Darius sat still. The card in his hand felt heavier than it looked. Not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. Someone who mattered in the art world had noticed him. Not just his painting, but him. He slipped the card into the inside pocket of his coat and returned to his canvas. His strokes were slower now. Not from doubt, but from care. Today's painting mattered more than yesterday's. And tomorrow's, he knew, might matter even more. The next day, Darius arrived a little later than usual. The sidewalk was already crowded with people heading to work, talking on phones, or sipping coffee. He carried his paints in a plastic bag and held his newest canvas under one arm. It was made from the back of an old poster he had found in a trash bin behind a store. He sat down at his usual spot, between a cracked wall and a metal pole, and gently placed the canvas on the ground. He looked around. The air smelled of exhaust and fresh bread from the bakery down the street. He noticed the bench across the road was empty today. The man with the silver hair wasn't there yet. Darius set up his paint jars and brushes. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the card William Hart had given him. It was still there, untouched, unbent. He left it where it was and began to paint. He worked slowly, letting the colors speak first. Browns mixed with soft yellows, then hints of green and gray. Shapes started to form, then fade. He painted over them, letting the canvas grow and shift as the hours passed. Around noon, a small crowd began to gather. It wasn't much, just a few people stopping out of curiosity. A man with a camera snapped a photo, then walked off. An older woman paused with her grocery cart and looked at the painting. She didn't say anything, but she nodded quietly before moving on. Then someone Darius recognized appeared. It was the young man from a few days ago, the one who had laughed at his painting. This time, he was alone. No jokes, no camera. He stood a few feet away and watched in silence. Darius didn't speak. He just kept painting. After a moment, the young man cleared his throat. "Hey," he said. "I didn't get it before. I think I do now." Darius didn't respond, but he gave a small nod. The young man stood there a moment longer, then walked away without another word. Shortly after, William Hart appeared again. This time, he was holding something under his arm, a small black folder. He waited until Darius finished a few brush strokes, then stepped forward. "I have something for you," he said. He opened the folder and showed Darius a photo. It was Darius's painting, the one with the bird-like shape. But this time, the painting was hanging on a clean white wall, under bright gallery lights. Next to it, a small card read, "Untitled by D. Ray." "I showed it to a few people in the gallery world," William said. "They were moved. They want to see more." Darius stared at the photo. His eyes stayed fixed on it for a long time. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. "You have talent," William added, "the kind people search for. If you're ready, I'd like to help you show the world." Darius looked down at his hands, still stained with paint. Then he looked back at his canvas and kept painting. He wasn't done yet, not even close. The next few days felt different for Darius. There was a shift in the air, a quiet energy he couldn't ignore. The city was still busy, but for some reason, it felt like the noise faded when he painted. Each brushstroke seemed to matter more than it ever had before. Maybe it was because of William's visit. Maybe it was because the card was still in his pocket, and every time he reached for it, he felt a new sense of possibility. As usual, Darius set up his canvas early. He worked in silence, with only the sounds of the street around him. People walked by, glancing at him now and then, but no one stopped to laugh or mock him. It was different, quieter. He had a feeling that things were changing, and he wasn't sure what to think about it. One afternoon, as the sun started to dip lower in the sky, William returned. He didn't have the folder this time. He was simply standing across the street, watching Darius with a careful, measured look. He was no longer just the man in the dark suit. Now he was something else, a symbol of something bigger, of opportunities Darius had never thought possible. After a few minutes, William crossed the street and walked toward him. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Darius nodded, dipping his brush into a jar of deep blue. "Slow," he replied, "but steady." "That's how it starts," William said with a slight smile. "But it won't stay slow for long. There's an event next week, a small gallery showing. They want your work. Darius didn't look up from his painting. He had heard what William said, but he wasn't sure he could believe it. An event. A gallery. It felt like a dream. "I'm not ready," Darius finally said, his voice almost a whisper. William crouched beside him. "You don't have to be ready. You're already doing the work. Your art is ready. It's you who needs to decide when to take the next step." Darius thought about it for a long moment. The streets, the people, the laughter, it all felt so far away now. But something else was pulling him forward. The idea of showing his work to the world, to have it seen and appreciated, made him feel a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. "I'll think about it," Darius said. William nodded. "Take your time. But remember, opportunities like this don't come often. They might not come again." The two of them stood there for a while, looking at the painting. It was a mix of colors and shapes, chaotic, but somehow beautiful. It was from his heart. And now maybe it was time for others to see it. As William turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Darius. "Just remember, the world doesn't have to change for you to make your mark. You already have." With that, William walked away, leaving Darius alone with his thoughts and his paints. Darius glanced at the card again, then slipped it into his coat pocket. It was time to decide. The world was waiting, and so was he. The days leading up to the gallery event were a blur for Darius. Every morning he arrived early, setting up his paints and canvases with a quiet focus. The city hummed around him, but he felt more removed from it now, as if he were part of something bigger, something he had once only dreamed of. He didn't know what to expect from the gallery showing, but he knew one thing. He had to be ready. He painted with more intensity than ever before. The brush moved faster, the colors bolder, and the shapes sharper. Some days, he felt like he was painting his entire life onto the canvas. The chaos, the struggle, the quiet moments when he felt invisible, it was all there. And in a way that made it feel real. It wasn't just art. It was his story. As the day of the event neared, Darius found himself thinking about the people who had passed him by in the streets. The ones who ignored him, the ones who laughed at his work. He wondered if they would come to see him now. Would they still laugh? Or would they stop and wonder who he really was? The gallery was on the edge of downtown, tucked between a row of tall buildings. The street was busy, filled with cars, people rushing to and from their destinations. From the outside, the gallery looked unremarkable, a glass door with a small sign above it. But inside, it was bright and clean, with white walls and soft lighting. It was a world so different from the one Darius had known. A world where his paintings would be seen and judged. A world that both excited and frightened him. The night of the event, he stood at the entrance of the gallery, dressed in a worn jacket that he had cleaned for the occasion. He felt out of place, but there was no going back now. The door opened, and the first group of people stepped inside. They were dressed in fine clothes, talking in quiet voices, admiring the paintings on the walls. Darius hesitated for a moment, then walked in. He didn't need to say anything. His art spoke for him. He moved through the crowd, watching as people stopped in front of his work. Some whispered to each other, some nodded in approval. A woman stood in front of one of his pieces for several minutes, tilting her head as she studied it. Darius felt a flutter of nervousness in his chest. What did they think? Was it good? Was it enough? Then he saw William across the room. The man in the suit stood with a group of people, his arms crossed as he listened to a woman discuss one of the paintings. William noticed Darius watching him and smiled, giving him a small nod. Darius gave a brief smile in return, but it didn't feel like enough. He wanted to speak, to thank William, to tell him how much this moment meant. But he didn't have the words. Soon, a man walked up to him. He was older, with gray hair and a serious look on his face. Darius stepped back, unsure if the man was going to say something critical. But instead, the man extended his hand. "This is your work," he asked, his voice quiet but filled with respect. Darius nodded, suddenly unsure of himself. The man studied him for a moment before speaking again. "It's powerful," he said simply. "I'd like to discuss a possible exhibition for your pieces." Darius blinked. He didn't know what to say at first. But then, the words came, soft but clear. "Thank you," he said. He wasn't sure if the world had truly changed. But in that moment, he knew something had shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. And his art, his story, had finally found a place in the world. A week after the gallery event, Darius found himself standing in front of a large building, his heart racing. This wasn't just any building. It was one of the top art galleries in the city, the kind of place he had only heard about in passing. The door was glass, and he could see inside, where bright lights illuminated carefully placed paintings. He had never imagined being in a space like this. Now, here he was, about to take his first real step into the world of art. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. The walls were lined with beautiful artwork from artists far more established than him. Yet, as he walked further into the gallery, the world around him seemed to disappear. It was just him and his paintings now. The paintings that had started as small moments of expression on cardboard and had grown into something larger. William was already inside, waiting by a display table. He smiled when he saw Darius and waved him over. "Glad you could make it," William said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know this might be overwhelming, but remember, you're here because your work is special." Darius nodded, though his nerves still buzzed inside. He glanced at the paintings hanging on the walls. They looked so polished, so perfect. His own work, his messy, raw pieces, felt out of place in this neat, refined space. Yet there they were, hung on the walls, ready for everyone to see. "What do you think?" William asked, sensing Darius's hesitation. Darius took a deep breath and looked around. The gallery felt different than the street corners he was used to. It was full of people talking about the art, some laughing softly, others deep in thought. Yet, as he stared at his work on the walls, he felt a strange calmness settle over him. This was his world now. It didn't matter that the paintings weren't perfect. They were real. They were his. I think it's real," Darius said quietly, finally turning to William. William smiled, clearly pleased with the answer. That's the right way to see it. Art is always real when it comes from the heart. Soon, people began to gather around. They stopped in front of his paintings, murmuring to each other. Darius stood at a distance, watching as his work was admired. Some people pointed at certain pieces and discussed them with quiet intensity. A few smiled, others simply nodded, but every glance felt like a confirmation that he belonged here. A few minutes later, a woman approached him. She was well-dressed, with short, silver hair and sharp glasses. She looked at him for a moment before speaking. "Are you the artist?" she asked, her tone polite but curious. Darius nodded, unsure of what to say. "Your work is fascinating," she continued. "There's a rawness to it, a kind of honesty that's hard to find in the art world." He was surprised by her words, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he just nodded. "I'd love to speak with you more about your work," she added. "There's a potential for it to reach a larger audience. Have you thought about where you want to take this next?" Darius swallowed, feeling a bit overwhelmed by the question. He hadn't really thought that far ahead. For so long, he had just painted because it was what he needed to do, not because he was looking for anything else. "I haven't really decided yet," he said honestly, "but I think I'm ready to see where it goes." The woman smiled, a small, approving smile. "I think you're ready too," she said. For the first time, Darius felt the weight of his past, the struggles, the nights spent painting alone, begin to lift. It was no longer just about surviving. It was about moving forward. And in that moment, he knew he had found his place, right here, in this world of art. The weeks following the gallery event were a whirlwind for Darius. He found himself stepping into new opportunities he had never imagined. His paintings were no longer just something he worked on in the early mornings on the sidewalks. Now they were featured in more galleries, each show drawing new faces, people who had never seen his work before, but now saw him as an artist worth watching. He spent his days painting in a small studio he had rented near the city center. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a few windows letting in the light, and a wooden desk piled with brushes, jars, and tubes of paint. But it was his space, a quiet place where he could create freely, without distractions. Sometimes he would glance at the window and see the busy streets outside. But in here, the world felt distant. The first time he received a letter from a major art buyer was when he realized just how much had changed. The envelope was thick, and the letter inside was formal, filled with words like commission and exhibition. The buyer wanted to know more about his work, wanted to meet with him. Darius had to read the letter twice before it truly sunk in. He hadn't expected things to move so quickly, and while part of him felt proud, another part felt nervous. What if he wasn't ready for all this? He spent the following days working even harder. He wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. But at the same time, he didn't want to lose the rawness that had always defined his work. The quiet moments of uncertainty, the messy strokes, the imperfections. That was what made his art real. It was what had made people stop and look. On the day of the meeting with the art buyer, Darius stood in front of his paintings, unsure of what to expect. He had seen other artists in fancy galleries, surrounded by people who nodded knowingly and discussed techniques he hadn't even heard of. But this time, it was his turn. When the art buyer arrived, he was an older man, wearing a tailored suit and a calm expression. He glanced at the paintings on the wall, his eyes thoughtful. Darius watched him closely, wondering what he thought. Would the man see what others had seen in his work, or would he dismiss it as just another piece of city street art? The buyer turned to him after a while. "You have a unique voice," he said, his tone measured. "There's honesty in what you paint. It's not just technique, it's emotion, something a lot of artists forget." Darius felt a warmth spread through him at the words. He didn't know much about art buyers or collectors, but he knew what he created had meaning. It wasn't about fitting into any mold. It was about telling his story in a way only he could. The conversation continued for another hour, but Darius felt lighter as the buyer spoke. There was no pressure, just a shared understanding. By the end of their talk, the buyer made an offer to represent him, to help his art reach even more people. As Darius walked out of the studio later that day, the sun setting behind him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Everything had changed, yes, but it hadn't changed him. He was still the man who painted on the sidewalk, the man who created from the heart. And as long as he stayed true to that, he knew the rest would fall into place. For the first time in his life, he truly believed he was where he was meant to be.